Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a distinct privilege for me to be Master of Ceremony for today's G20 launching of the Pandemic Fund at the Mulia Resort, Bali. I, Karvina Widyopalupi from Ministry of Finance of Indonesia, would like to extend a very warm welcome to the President of Indonesia, Bapak Joko Widodo, Minister of Finance of Indonesia, Ibu Sri Mulyani Indrawati, Minister of Health of Indonesia, Bapak Budi Gunadi Sadikin, U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Mrs. Janet Yellen, Minister of Economy and Finance of Italy, Mr. Giancarlo Giorgetti, Vice Minister of National Health Commission of the People's Republic of China, Professor Xiao Zuotao, Secretary of Ministry of Health and Family Welfare of India, Mr. Rajesh Bhushan, President of World Bank Group, Mr. David Malpass, Director General of the WHO, Mr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Deputy Director General for Economic and Financial Affairs, European Commission, Ms. Elena Flores-Gual, World Bank Managing Director of Operation, Mr. Axel van Trotzenberg, and Co-Chair of the Pandemic Fund, Dr. Khatib Basri. Om Swastiastu, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to the G20 launching of the Pandemic Fund here at the Mulia Resort, Nusa Dua, Bali. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for accepting the invitations, and we appreciate that you're taking time of your busy schedules to join us this afternoon. Strengthening the global health architecture has been a key priority issue for Indonesia's G20 presidency. The new Financial Intermediary Fund, or FIF, for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response, or PPR, has been officially established and named the Pandemic Fund. I am delighted to welcome you all to this monumental event that represents our shared collective efforts to address the fault lines and financing gaps in the pandemic PPR. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now start the event with a virtual keynote speech and launching of the Pandemic Fund by the President of Indonesia, Bapak Joko Widodo. Please use channel 1 provided on the table for English interpretation. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now move to the next agenda. A welcoming remark from Minister of Finance of Indonesia. We would like to invite to the podium Minister of Finance of Indonesia, Ibu Sri Mulyani Indrawati. To Ibu Sri Mulyani, stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Excellencies, my colleague Ministers of Finance as well as Minister of Health, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to all of you from a different part of the world. Good afternoon, good evening. We are meeting today in a hybrid format, showing that although the world has yet to return to complete normality, it is recovering and keep also improving. For all of you who are able to join us here in person, I do hope that you are enjoying our hospitality in Bali, the island of God, that also provide you with hopefully a little bit more refreshing from your very, I'm sure, busy schedule back home. Thank you also for all of you who participating through the virtual. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, in 2020, when the global health system, in this case, hit hard by this pandemic, the global health system also successfully mobilized to initiate financing arrangement to support the initial COVID-19 response. This was done through rapid and massive mobilization of financing by all government using mostly the fiscal tools, supported by monetary tools, but also the participation of the international financial institution. But this mobilization also underscores the lack of preparedness of global as well as regional financing institutions, as well as national government to adequately respond to health emergency like the pandemic COVID-19. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the vulnerability of health system globally, as mentioned by Bapak Presiden Jokowi, including our ability to adequately absorb the shock from public health emergency like pandemic, which is devastating, of course, from a human point of view, but also from the economic point of view. Estimated around 12 trillion the cost of this pandemic to the economy. For many low and middle income countries, the pandemic has exposed also the chronic underinvestment in critical health infrastructure, human resources, surveillance, laboratory, and also diagnostic system. This is also exposing the weaknesses of the primary health care system that actually could help country to be better handling with any new pandemic that surely is going to attack us again. The resource constraint for many low and middle income countries has been actually in a very severe constraint. They have to choose between the area which is strategically important, like health system, or using for many other priority, including infrastructure development. So when the pandemic hit the countries, that's creating the global risk. Because when the world facing with the pandemic, we can only successfully overcome it when all countries are ready and have the ability to address the issue of pandemic. Given health is a global public good, this means that international financing must still play a very important role in supporting low and middle income countries so that they are going to be better prepared for future health shocks. But in this, there's been lack of focus or little focus on how the international financing could be established, and especially also combining between public and private in building the public health system. It is critical for any international financing effort to motivate as well as to increase the allocation of their budget for strengthening public health system. The public as well as private sector, they actually can complement each other, not crowding out. Considering the recent experience from this pandemic, the leaders in Rome Declaration has already mandating Minister of Finance and Health to continue working so that the world have the ability to better prepare and respond when the next pandemic is going to hit the world. Through many of the meeting, and I really in this case would like to express my appreciation to many of the support coming from you all, many deliberation, months of intense discussion on how we are going to design this financial intermediary facility and how to operationalize that, with a lot of warning that we should strengthen WHO role and strengthening the global health architecture. We are now reaching the moment in which we have successfully established financial intermediary fund. This is the funding for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response, which we are now called as pandemic fund. This is not an easy task, given at the same time during the Indonesia presidency, many countries is in a first that they cannot meet physically, as well as the development of the geopolitics. It's creating additional challenge for all of us to work together. So many of you, we just meet today, is actually a strong supporter and believer that the world should be better prepared for the next pandemic. The G20 Joint Finance Health Task Force is also the mechanism for us to be able to deliver the tasks which is mandated by our leader. The task force, with the support from the Secretariat, has been instrumental in completing the mandate from our leaders, and the supporting from World Bank and World Health Organization are instrumental. Through the task force, the G20 has played a very important role in the development and the design of this fund. This process will still continue. We still have a lot of homework that need to be done. But establishing pandemic fund is underscoring how important that the communication as well as collaboration that need to be maintained regardless the differences, and how we should be able to look and agree on what is most important in preparing the world for the next pandemic attack. We have 20 contributors for this pandemic fund. Those countries who's the founding countries for this fund, as well as 3 philanthropists. And last night, on our second and last meeting between Joint Finance and Health, we also heard a couple of new countries which is they are promising or they are going to announce their contribution to this pandemic fund. So we are actually extremely encouraged by this development. The amount that so far has been accumulated, 1.4 billion, is just the starting figures. As President Jokowi mentioned earlier, the estimated need is up to 31 billion US dollar. But this is not the one and the only instrument which is related to the health system preparedness and also improving the health system globally. So this fund definitely is going to work together with other instruments in order for us to be able to develop our ability to prepare better for the pandemic. The pandemic fund, hence, is become the catalytic fund for further long-term support from all bilateral as well as multilateral institutions. We do hope also the participation from philanthropic as well as private sector can be continued encouraged. As I have already mentioned, that this is not only the G20 initiative, this is the global concern. And that's why we are also delighted that many countries outside the G20 also participating in contributing to this pandemic fund. And we will have to continue build the inclusive governance, as also mentioned by all G20 members last night, and also strengthening the international health architecture. Ladies and gentlemen, with the launching of this pandemic fund, which is a very important milestone for all of us, this will provide a starting point for all of us to demonstrate to the world that G20 is able to produce a concrete action that can have a global impact. With the leadership of the G20, and especially from many of you, my colleague, Minister of Finance, who attended this afternoon, as well as those who also attended virtually, we have the confidence that the G20 could also deliver many other concrete results, given the risk from the global economic situation is continue demand our attention. With that, I would like to express our appreciation, Indonesia holding this presidency, using this platform as well as the presidency responsibility. We would like to express our appreciation and thank you for all of your support, whether this is from all the G20 members, invited countries, international organizations, and especially for the WHO and World Bank, who work tirelessly, closely together with many major countries to be able to establish this fund. Thank you so much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Ibu Sri Mulyani, for the welcoming remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now move to the next agenda. A second remark from the President of World Bank Group. We would like to invite virtually the President of World Bank Group, Mr. David Malpass. To Mr. Malpass, the screen is yours.
Thank you, President Widodo and Minister Sri Mulyani, for your leadership, and Dr. Tedros for your coordination on this initiative. I'm now on my way to Bali, and I look forward to seeing you soon. It's great that today we are formally presenting the Pandemic Fund. We meet at a time of multiple crises: climate change, food, fuel, inflation, debt, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This new dedicated fund is an important tool that will support low and middle income countries and regions to become better prepared for global health crises. Moreover, we expect it will incentivize countries to prioritize their agenda and increase their own efforts. I thank the founding donors for their leadership and generous seed contributions. I'm encouraged that over $1.4 billion has already been committed by 24 donors, and I understand that additional pledges are forthcoming. I urge all countries to contribute to the fund. The Pandemic Fund is a testament to the possibility of global coordination. The fund was championed by Italy and Indonesia during their respective G20 presidencies. The World Bank was pleased to support these efforts and help build consensus through evidence-based analysis and lessons from good practice and many years of experience. Together with our G20 partners, the founding donors, WHO, civil society organizations, and other stakeholders, we were able to develop the fund at record speed. We are pleased to host the Secretariat and to serve as the fund's trustee and as an implementing entity. Through dedicated investments in pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response, the Pandemic Fund can help make the world safer. Its very nature contributes to a global public good with benefits that are shared by all across borders. Every dollar we mobilize for the fund that can be invested now in low and middle income countries will save lives and reduce costs for the world for years to come. I'm happy that the Pandemic Fund's governance and operational structure is grounded in the spirit of shared responsibilities that need to address global public goods. First, the fund's governance is agile and inclusive by representing contributors, co-investors, and civil society. Second, the operating structure is flexible to deliver support to countries and regions through existing institutions and therefore complements their work and draws on their comparative advantages. And third, the fund's structure incorporates high standards of transparency and accountability. The health, economic, and social ripple effects of COVID-19 are a stark reminder that preparedness is vital. We've seen millions of lives lost and severe reversals in development. We cannot afford to let this happen again. The Pandemic Fund provides an opportunity to do things differently by helping countries, regions, and the world be stronger in the face of global threats. Thank you all, and see you in Bali soon.
Thank you, Mr. Malpass, for the remark. We will now move to the next agenda. The third remark from the Director General of the WHO. We would like to invite virtually the Director General of WHO, Mr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus. To Mr. Tedros, the screen is yours.
Terima kasih. First, I would like to thank His Excellency President Widodo for his message. Your Excellency Sri Mulyani, Your Excellency Minister Budi Sadiki, and my friend President of the World Bank, David Malpass, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends. Good morning from Geneva, and I'm delighted to join you for this historic moment. I would particularly like to thank Minister Mulyani and the government of Indonesia for your leadership in creating the Pandemic Fund as a key part of your G20 presidency. I also thank Italy for its work last year with Indonesia to form and chair the G20 Joint Finance Health Task Force for Pandemic Preparedness and Response. I also thank Saudi Arabia for beginning the relay of discussions on pandemic financing under its G20 presidency in 2020. And I welcome and thank our founding donors, co-investor countries, implementing partners, and civil society representatives. I would like to say a special thank you to our colleagues from WHO and the World Bank, especially Bruce, Priya, Scott, Magnus, and Mamta. You have all played a vital role in bringing us to this point and will continue to be essential for the success of the fund. We all know that the COVID-19 pandemic has been a seismic shock to global health and the global economy. But we also know that this will not be the last pandemic. The next one is a matter of when, not if. The effects of climate change, urbanization, and deforestation all mean that the frequency, severity, and economic impact of epidemics and pandemics are only going to get bigger unless we take concerted and coordinated action as one global community. The suffering and loss we have all endured will be in vain unless we learn the painful lessons that COVID-19 is teaching us and put in place the measures to make the world safer. There have been multiple reviews of the global response to the pandemic with more than 300 recommendations. At the request of our member states, in May this year, WHO published a white paper with 10 key proposals for strengthening the global architecture for health emergency preparedness, response, and resilience. Importantly, our member states have affirmed that the international health regulations must remain the foundation of that architecture, supplemented by a new international accord, which, as you know, countries are now negotiating. A recurring theme of the reviews and one of our 10 key proposals is to create a new fund to provide catalytic and gap-filling funding for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. The vital role of the pandemic fund will be to rapidly close critical gaps in core capacities for implementing the international health regulations globally, regionally, and nationally. Crucially, countries must be in the driver's seat. The fund's primary aim must be to support national plans to close the gaps that countries themselves identify and to mobilize domestic commitment and financing. This will require careful analysis and prioritization, which will be the hardest job for the board and the technical advisory panel. As a custodian of the international health regulation, WHO looks forward to playing its central coordinating role as chair of the technical advisory panel and in providing technical leadership and guidance to the board. My thanks again to Indonesia and Italy and to all of you for everything you have done to bring us to this point. But this is just the beginning. Now we must work with urgency to issue the first call for proposals by the end of the year, to capitalize the fund adequately and to fulfill the fund's purpose for making the world safer. WHO is totally committed to playing our part to make the fund a success and to build a healthier, safer, fairer future for all the people of the world. Thank you so much again. This is very historic. We're very happy. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Mr. Tedros, for the remark. We will now move to the next agenda, the last remark from the World Bank Managing Director of Operations. We would like to invite to the podium the World Bank Managing Director of Operations, Mr. Axel van Trotsenburg. To Mr. Trotsenburg, the stage is yours.
Thank you, President Widodo, Mr. Srimulyani, Mr. Budi. Thank you for your leadership on establishing the Pandemic Fund. I'm very happy to join here in Bali for the launch of this fund, which will be hosted by the World Bank, but will be operated together with the WHO. In that context, I really would like to thank Dr. Tedros for the great collaboration we have had with the WHO. Would also like to thank Bruce, who is here, and Mike, who are here in the room, for a great collaboration. I think the establishment of this fund is actually very good news worldwide, because this initiative demonstrates what multilateral cooperation can still achieve. And I think here Italy and Indonesia provided critical leadership under their respective G20 presidencies. I also would like to really thank Madam Secretary Yellen for her constant encouragement to set up this fund, with speed, to do it right, and to get it done. And I think we got it done, Madam Secretary, I think in record time. Thank you. I also would say I would like to really thank for the pledges that were made by 24 countries. This was record. I've been on the fundraising business. This is not easy, and we got that. And a particular thank you to the two largest donors who made a great effort, was the United States and the European Union. Thank you for this. As also David mentioned already in his remarks, it was speed that created this, but it was not compromising quality. We got a very good structure in place, but what I think this fund also shows is that the speed required an enormous amount of consultations and collaboration and focus. And I think that established this fund. And what we will need for the implementation is also speed and long-term commitment to this. It cannot be just shortly, but it will need this international collaboration in order to be better prepared for the next pandemic. And I think what Dr. Tedros just mentioned in his contribution, ownership by countries will be key, as well as incentives. It will require incentives as well as payments and dedication of resources by the countries themselves, but it could also be important to complement these resources by this pandemic fund. So therefore, again, this collaboration and this jointness will be key for the success. In short, I think the pandemic fund really offers a real opportunity to do things differently. We need to stay focused on it, and we have to stay focused on this in the long term. And I think we are off to a good start. Next year will be the year of implementation. The call for proposals is coming, and I think we hope to be able to report next year on the first cases in which we are working with partner countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Schwarzenberg, for the remark. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now move to the main program of this event, high-level panel on pandemic PPR. Our speakers for today's high-level seminar are U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Madam Janet Yellen, Minister of Economy and Finance of Italy, Mr. Giancarlo Giorgetti, Vice Minister of National Health Commission of the People's Republic of China, Professor Xiao Shu-tao, Secretary of Ministry of Health and Family Welfare of India, Mr. Rajesh Bhushan, Deputy Director General for Economic and Financial Affairs, European Commission, Ms. Elena Flores-Gual, World Bank Managing Director of Operations, Mr. Axel van Trotzenberg, and co-chair of the Pandemic Fund, Dr. Kati Basri. All presentation and discussion will be moderated by Executive Head of the Pandemic Fund Secretariat, Ms. Priya Basu. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome our moderator today, Ms. Priya Basu. Hi, Ms. Priya Basu. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much. May I invite the panelists to please join me on stage. U.S. Treasury Secretary Dr. Janet Yellen, World Bank Managing Director for Operations, Dr. Axel van Trotzenberg, Deputy Director General for Economic and Financial Affairs, Ms. Elena Flores, Dr. Chatib Basri, former Finance Minister of Indonesia and co-chair of the Pandemic Fund Board. And we're also joined virtually by the Italy Minister of Economy and Finance, Mr. Giancarlo Giorgetti, by China's Vice Minister of the National Health Commission, Professor Chao Xuetao, by India's Secretary for Health and Family Welfare, Mr. Rajesh Bhushan. So good afternoon, everyone. It really is my honor to moderate this high-level panel on the launch of the Pandemic Fund. And we're thrilled to have with us a really star-studded panel. Thank you all so much for making the time to join us. Our distinguished panelists need no further introduction. Over the next 70 minutes or so, we will hear from our panelists on why the Pandemic Fund was created, why it's needed, what promise it offers, and what they would like to see it accomplished. We will have time for 2 rounds of questions and interventions, and then a last rapid-fire round. This event is being live-streamed, and we have people joining and watching from all over the world. Please use the hashtag Pandemic Fund on social media of your choice to participate on online conversations. So without further ado, let me just start. If I may start with you, Secretary Yellen. The United States was an early supporter of the Pandemic Fund. Can you talk about why you felt so strongly that such a fund was needed?
Well, thank you so much for that question, Priya. And first, thanks to the Indonesian presidency for organizing this event and for creating the opportunity to celebrate what I think is an historic achievement together. We all know the steep price we have paid in human lives and in economic hardship in the nearly 3 years since the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. And we're also just beginning to understand some of its longer-term impacts and societal costs, such as the detrimental impact it has had on the learning outcomes of our children. So even as we recover from COVID-19, countries around the world are dealing with other outbreaks, monkeypox, Ebola, and doing their best to hold at bay the rise of new COVID variants. Public health issues are simply not going away, so addressing them is critical to our well-being. And that's why at the very first Global COVID Summit that President Biden hosted in September of 2021, Vice President Harris actually called for the establishment of a financial intermediary fund that would be focused solely on strengthening pandemic preparedness. Having now pledged $450 million to this fund, the United States is demonstrating the importance of preparation before the next pandemic, instead of reacting after it unfolds. The Pandemic Fund is a new and vital tool to help prepare for future pandemics that could threaten lives and livelihoods everywhere around the world. And I think crucially, the fund will help catalyze additional investments in pandemic preparedness and enhance coordination among key partners. Just taking a step back, let me just reflect on the importance of the G20's efforts and its role in the multilateral system. We're gathering here at a difficult time with significant tensions among G20 members given Russia's war in Ukraine. And it's easy for commentators to question the effectiveness of this forum. But I would challenge that notion. I think the G20 is most important in times of crisis. And amid the current confluence of events, it's easy to overlook the significance of the achievements in health over the last 2 years. This group came together in the midst of the largest global health crisis in a century to take concrete steps to be better prepared for the next one. And it wasn't always easy, but in the end, this group has played a significant role in delivering concrete outcomes. Well, it's just a start, and there's a long way to go. I'm proud of what we have accomplished to improve coordination among finance and health officials, which was a key gap in the global health architecture, through the G20 Finance and Health Task Force and the establishment of the Pandemic Fund. And I think the steps we've taken this year will help deliver on the vision of a healthier, more responsive, and more robust global health architecture. And this is exactly the type of response the world expects from the G20, an example of what the G20 can deliver.
Thank you so much, Secretary Yellen. If I may turn to Minister Giorgetti, who's joining us virtually. Minister Giorgetti, Italy co-chaired with Indonesia the G20 Finance and Health Task Force, which provided a forum for robust discussions on why strengthening global health security is an investment in the future. Can you share with us your perspective on the investment case for the pandemic fund? Do we have Minister Giorgetti?
Marking a very important moment in making the world more resilient to future pandemics. Indonesia can be very proud, not just of its leadership in supporting the creation of the fund, but also of organizing an excellent event. As you mentioned, Italy has put significant effort towards this. First, as a G20 presidency, and then supporting Indonesia's G20 presidency as co-chairs of the task force. Italy has a long history of giving impulse to important initiatives in global health. Back in 2001, as G8 presidency, we were involved in the establishment of the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. In 2009, again as a G8 presidency, we led the creation of the Advanced Market Commitment, an instrument to introduce innovative vaccines against the pneumococcus. Those investments paid off. The MSC experience was invaluable in allowing the creation of COVAX, a critical tool to ensure access to new COVID-19 vaccines for all countries at the same time, which is run by the Gavi Alliance. Under Italy's presidency, the G20 has given critical impetus to ensure equitable distribution of COVID-19 medical countermeasures, promoting all the existing multilateral activities. Finally, in my previous role, I have personally been a strong supporter of the establishment of the important project of common European interest in the field of health. Overcoming market failures and pushing the boundaries of innovation through public-private partnership will bring positive spillovers, not just as for a European economy, but also for global health. At the same time, it was clear that dealing with the current pandemic was not sufficient. The events of 2020 showed all.
Thank you very much, Minister Giorgetti. If I can turn to Professor Chow, who is joining us from China. Are you able to hear us, Professor Chow? Great. So China is a founding donor of the Pandemic Fund. It would be great to hear from you reflecting on your lessons from COVID-19, why you believe this fund is needed.
Distinguished ministers, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to participate in the launching of the Pandemic Fund. China would congratulate Indonesia on your leadership demonstrated during your G20 presidency in 2022 and on the successful establishment and operation of the pandemic fund. The current COVID-19 pandemic has exposed technical and funding gaps globally in pandemic PPR, as well as uneven access to VTD, vaccines, testing, and diagnostics. In order to fill the above-mentioned gaps, China believes it is imperative to establish a dedicated and sustainable source of funding for global pandemic PPR. China believes the fund is an important measure to implement the consensus of G20 Leaders Summit. It will help meet the urgent needs of developing countries in the health sector, while helping them enhance their capabilities in response to major public health emergencies. The fund is expected to help ensure the central role of WHO in global health governance, fully mobilize all sources of funding, and jointly safeguard life and health of mankind. At the same time, the purpose of the fund is in great alignment with the Global Development Initiative proposed by President Xi Jinping at the 76th UNGA. China hopes the fund will become a useful complement to existing public health financing mechanisms without fragmentation and duplication, with a view to enhancing global capabilities in response to major public health emergencies, to make positive contribution to health and well-being of mankind, and to build towards a community of shared health for mankind. China is ready to work with all the other G20 members to ensure the long-term success of the fund. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My next question is to Secretary Bhushan from India. Secretary Bhushan, are you able to hear us?
Yes.
In your view, what gap in the global health architecture does the pandemic fund fill?
Thank you, Priya, and esteemed panelists, as well as distinguished delegates who are there physically. The first thing that we must remember is that COVID-19 pandemic has indeed been the biggest test of the global health and financial system of the century. It has brought to the fore the need for effective convergence between health and finance and the need to invest in pandemic PPR. So what is needed is collective action to augment global health security, supported by domestic and international funding. What is also needed is an empowered and sustainably financed WHO at the center of the global health architecture. Launch of the pandemic fund with about 1.4 billion funding pledges is a positive milestone in our collective efforts. And I take this opportunity to place on record our deep appreciation and commendation of the Indonesian presidency, as well as the Italian leadership prior to that in this regard. The fund will support in building sustainable and resilient global health systems to combat future pandemics. The uniqueness of this fund lies in its inclusive governance framework and its focus on pandemic preparedness, prevention, and response. Future health emergencies may occur anytime. Hence, plugging the gaps in pandemic PPR, including developing global surveillance, research, and development of medical countermeasures, and building IHR core capacities should remain a priority area going ahead. Preventive and preparedness strategies are low cost and high impact in terms of return on investment. Therefore, it is critical to look beyond the current pandemic and focus on building capacities at all levels for pandemic